It's a pleasure to be back in Helena, the site of the only branch office of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. What I'm going to do, I'm going to be brief in my opening remarks. I'm going to kick things off with some basics about the Federal Reserve System and some thoughts about Fed history. But really the plan is for us to spend the bulk of our time this evening on your questions. One key point before I proceed: the views I express today are my own and not necessarily those of others in the Federal Reserve System, including my colleagues in the FOMC. And if they were here, they would be endorsing that view. In terms of basics about the Fed, I like to tell people that the Fed is a uniquely American institution. And what do I mean when I say that? Well, relative to its counterparts around the world, the U.S. central bank is highly decentralized. The Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis is one of 12 regional reserve banks that, along with the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., make up the Federal Reserve System. Our bank represents the 9th of the 12 Federal Reserve districts, and our district includes Montana, the Dakotas, Minnesota, northwestern Wisconsin, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So 8 times per year, the Federal Upper Market Committee, the FOMC that Tom referred to, meets to set monetary policy over the next 6 to 7 weeks. All 12 presidents of the various regional Federal Reserve banks, including me, and the governors of the Federal Reserve Board contribute to these deliberations. However, the committee itself consists only of the governors, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and a rotating group of 4 other presidents. So I'm one of those 4 other presidents this year. So that all the presidents and the governors attend the meetings and participate in the deliberations, but only a subset of them get to vote on policy in a given year. And this year I am a voter. In this way, the structure of the FOMC mirrors the federalist structure of our own government, because representatives from different regions of the country, various presidents, have input into FOMC deliberations. So this basic federalist structure I've just described has a long history. In fact, this year is the centennial of the opening of the 12 reserve banks and the start of the work undertaken by the Federal Reserve System. It's been a fascinating 100 years, lots of twists and turns along the way, and I'm sure that many of you have questions about that journey. The answers to all of your questions, and probably more, are on a website that the Fed has created at federalreservehistory.org. So Federal Reserve History is all one word, .org. I encourage you to visit this site. You can learn about the people, places, and events that have shaped Federal Reserve history. And I'd especially encourage you to look up Norman Holter, H-O-L-T-E-R. Mr. Holter is one of the original directors of the Minneapolis Reserve Bank, and he played the key role in a branch office being established here in Helena in 1921. Now, actually, history, I've always enjoyed reading and studying history. It's way back to when I was a small child, actually. It's a little embarrassing. But I strongly believe that history can help policymakers make decisions in the current day. But at the same time, I do think that policymakers need to be careful in how they use history. So the monetary history of the United States, monetary history of the 1970s in the United States, is a great example of this need for care. So we have a great mix of ages in the room, but I'm sure that some of you in this room remember that inflation, the rate of growth of prices, rose at disturbingly high levels in the 1970s. Faced with this challenge, President Gerald Ford launched a national campaign, the Whip Inflation Now campaign. WIN for short. You know, it's all true. We all lived through it. The famous Broadway composer, Meredith Willson, known for the Music Man, if you know that musical, wrote a song for the WIN campaign in which he summarized the economic situation in these kitschy lyrics. So, my parent, a little segue, digression here. My parents actually came from opposite ends of the world. My dad is from India. My mom's from the United States. Despite coming from opposite ends of the world, they did have a lot of things in common. And one of the things they had in common was neither of them could carry a tune. And that has been passed on to me. So I am not going to try to sing the words to you of Meredith Willson. I will, though, tell you about those words. He summarized the economic situation in the 1970s in these catchy lyrics. Who needs inflation? Not this nation. Who's going to pass it by? You are, and so am I. Mr. Wilson's pithy characterization was spot on in 1974. But 40 years later, I would suggest that it's exactly backward. Right now, this nation needs more inflation. The Federal Reserve aims to keep the personal consumption expenditure, the PCE inflation rate, at 2% per year. But since the start of the recession almost 7 years ago, the PCE inflation rate has averaged 1.5% per year. Over the past year, it has averaged 1.6% per year, 1.6%. And I expect it to remain below 2% until 2018, so 4 years from now. The persistently below target inflation that we see in our country is a signal that the U.S. economy is not taking advantage of all available resources. If demand were sufficiently high to generate 2% inflation, then demand would be sufficiently high to allow the economy to make use of these underutilized resources. And the most important of these underutilized resources are the American people. There are many people in this country who want to work more hours, and our society is being deprived of their production. So it's fun and educational to read about the 1970s on the Fed History Gateway, and I encourage you to do so. But it's critical for monetary policymakers like myself that they'll realize that the times and the challenges that we face evolve over time, and the ones we face now are different from the ones that Mr. Wilson wrote about back in 1974. Thanks again for coming tonight, and now it's time to turn to your questions.